Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining MSAA's live webinar, Summer Wellness Tips for Life with MS. We're so happy to have you here with us tonight, along with special guest speaker, Dr. Ilana Katz. Together, we'll be exploring practical ways to support your health and wellness throughout the summer season. My name is Jahaira Rivera, and I'm Director of Mission Delivery and Program Development for MSAA, and I'm honored to be your host for tonight's program. And now I would like to share a quick overview of who we are and the programs and services we offer to the MS community across the country. MSAA is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to improving lives today through vital services and support. We provide a wide range of resources, including a national helpline staffed by compassionate team members, equipment and cooling distribution programs, with products designed to assist with mobility, safety, and heat sensitivity, as well as educational initiatives and award-winning publications to keep you informed about the latest in MS care. We also offer digital resources, an online community, and much more. To learn more about our programs and services, please visit our website at mymsaa.org. And we would like for you to stay connected with MSAA, so please make sure to visit our website where you can opt in for informative email updates. You can also follow us on social media. And now you can text MSAA to the number 75101, and you will receive text updates right on your phone. And now let's move on with some reminders and housekeeping items. During tonight's program, you are welcome to submit questions by using the Q&A feature on your Zoom. We are going to do our best to answer some of those questions at the end of the presentation during the Q&A session. Today's webinar is being recorded and is going to be available as an on-demand video on our website within the next couple of weeks. And as usual, at the end of the program, we kindly ask you to complete a brief survey. Your feedback is so important, and it helps us to improve future content and programs. And this is just a friendly reminder. This program is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute any formal recommendations. If you have specific questions, please speak with your doctor or healthcare provider team. And now, please join me in welcoming our guest speaker, Dr. Ilana Katz. She graduated summa cum laude from the Wharton School and earned her medical degree from Columbia University. She completed her neurology residency and a fellowship in multiple sclerosis at Mount Sinai, where she now serves as an associate director of the CGD Center for MS. She's also a neurology professor at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. Dr. Katz serves as a principal investigator on several studies exploring how environmental factors, particularly diet, influence MS prognosis. She has received multiple awards for clinical excellence and communication and leads NIH and foundational funded research on diet, lifestyle, and the microbiome in MS-related conditions. Welcome, Dr. Katz. Thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here with you tonight. I'm really excited to be here and talk to you all about this topic, which is so relevant given where we are in the season. So thank you again for having me here tonight. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Ilana Katz, and I'm from the MS Center at Mount Sinai. You'll see in my presentation, I also credited a few of the things I'm going to talk about on diet to our wonderful dietitian, Jessica Gelman. So today we're going to talk about summer wellness tips for living with MS. Oh, let's see if we can get our slides to move. There we go. So we'll start out by talking about some summer-related issues and tips for how we can handle them. So we'll answer questions like, why do people living with MS often feel worse when it's hot outside? And is it dangerous to become overheated? We'll talk about some tips for how to stay cool in summer settings and the importance of rest and conserving energy. And then we'll talk about working towards a healthier lifestyle. In particular, we'll talk about some special considerations for summertime in relation to diet, exercise, and sleep. Okay, so first of all, our summer-related issues. So a question I commonly get is, why do people who are living with MS feel worse when it's hot outside? And so the answer for that really comes back to MS pathology and how the disease works. So I'm sure everyone is familiar with um, the way in MS, we don't really know why this happens exactly, but we know that the myelin, which is the covering on top of nerve cells, becomes damaged. And you can see that here in this graphic, which is on the MSAA website if you'd like to take a further look at it and do some more reading about the pathology. But basically, what you see here is that the myelin becomes damaged. And nerves need myelin in terms of helping with the speed of conduction. So you can see here in the graphic on the right, the way that looks in terms of a nerve cell. You can see there the body of the neuron at the top, and then the axon, and that's the axon is the part where the signal has to get transmitted to the next neuron or to a muscle or to wherever this nerve cell is going. And so in the case of MS, we're talking about the central nervous system, right? We're talking about the nervous tissue in the brain, the optic nerves, the spinal cord. And so when that's damaged, the speed of conduction is not as fast. Neurons, we know, do conduct most efficiently when it's cool. And so what can happen is something that is described as Uthoff's phenomenon, which I'm sure is a term that a lot of people are familiar with. And with Uthoff's phenomenon, which is really described with relation to optic neuritis and vision, what happens is when your body temperature goes up, so it has more actually to do with body temperature than the temperature outside, but when body temperature goes up, that speed of conduction is not as efficient. And so if there is damage there because the myelin is not intact, or because the nerve cell is maybe has also been damaged underneath that, the speed of conduction becomes even slower. And so, especially relating to areas where you may sometimes get MS symptoms or where you may have had symptoms in the past, those can kind of come back out when body temperature goes up. So the next question I often get is that dangerous? Am I doing myself harm by being outside in the sun? Am I doing myself harm by going to the beach or by exercise? The short answer is no. You are not doing yourself any kind of permanent damage. So as we just talked about, it's not as if people are getting new lesions or there's disease progression or something permanently bad is going to happen. That's absolutely not the case. However, the longer answer is that you may absolutely feel worse when your body becomes warm. And so the way that that usually manifests is as worsening of usual MS symptoms, as I had mentioned. And so that can be things like if you're someone who had an optic neuritis in the past, you may notice that in that eye, when you get hot, that your vision becomes kind of more gray or more dark or more faded. You may notice if you've previously had numbness in your extremities or if you've previously had weakness, those symptoms may come back out. The most common things that I hear about are really fatigue and brain fog, and those two things tend to be what most people experience. But I will have some of my patients tell me when it's warm, I melt, or everything turns to jelly. You know, these are really common feelings in people who live with MS when body temperature goes up. The other thing to remember is that if you do become severely overheated, you might not recover immediately as soon as you cool down. So a lot of people feel like, well, if I go out and I do this and I do that, I'll just go inside for a few minutes and I'll feel okay. That might be the case. And for some people it is. But for some people, it actually can take more like hours to days to feel better. But if that does happen, you absolutely will feel better. This is not going to be something that's permanent. So you're not doing yourself harm from a pathologic disease activity or progression standpoint. It's really important to participate in activities that you enjoy. So we don't want you missing out on those fun things in life, and we'll go through some tips to try to make those things more comfortable. And it's also really important to exercise, so don't count yourself out for that either. So this is kind of the overall theme for today, which is that I really think it's well worth the investment in planning to try to stay cool, rather than getting overheated and then having to first cool down. That's going to be a lot harder and a lot more uncomfortable. Okay, so we'll go through some tips. So staying cool when the temperature outside is hot. So the first thing is obviously if you are at home and you have air conditioning in your home, first thing to do is make sure beginning of the season, make sure you get that maintenance done, make sure that it's working well and is going to be available for you over the summer. If you don't have air conditioning, there are a lot of people who don't have air conditioning in their home, particularly if you live in a climate that's usually temperate. If you find yourself in a heat wave, you should consider staying with family or friends who have air conditioning available. That's definitely a very reasonable request that people will be happy to help you with. If you are going to be at home and you've noticed that it's, extremely hot outside, some things that you can do is make sure you're drawing the shades when the sun is high. So in the middle part of the day, that will help keep the home cooler. Fans can definitely help to recirculate air. You could take a cool shower or bath. You definitely want to stay hydrated, and you could think about getting a cooling pillow for nighttime or other gear. And we're going to talk more about cooling gear in a few minutes. So if you are going to be going out, I think the most important thing, number one, two, and three, is have a plan. So first of all, when you're thinking about what your plans are for the day, if it's possible, you may want to adjust your plans based on the weather. So if you live in an area where usually the summer temperature is, in the 80s and you had plans to be outside most of the day and you see, looking at the weather, it's going to be 100 degrees, it might be better if you could reschedule those plans. And I'm not saying to cancel them because, again, we don't want people missing out on things that are fun in life. But you may wish to just reschedule that for a different day when it's not going to be quite as warm. So things like going to the movies or spending time in a shopping mall or going to a museum, places that are indoors and that have air conditioning, great things to do on days when it really is just too hot to be outside. Other things to think about are prioritizing time outside in the early morning or in the evening when it's cooler. This is a photo that was taken by my husband at a beach in the evening. So really, really beautiful times to be outside. So if going to the beach is something that you absolutely love to do, but it's really too much for you in the middle of the day when it's really hot, try to go early in the morning or try to go in the evening when it's a little bit cooler and more manageable outside. You definitely want to choose your clothing carefully. So thinking about lightweight and flowy styles. You want to choose lighter colors because darker colors are going to absorb the heat. And if you can, if they're available to you, clothing with UV filters are really great. Those will help keep you cooler as well and have the added bonus, of course, of protecting your skin. And then wearing a hat. The wider brim, the better. You definitely want to make sure you can look for shade or bring your own. And you'll see a couple of things that I'll have in my presentation tonight that are from Wirecutter. Wirecutter is something I look at all the time whenever I'm looking to get something that I think is going to be a handy tool. I always look to see if Wirecutter sent a review because they'll tell you what things they think are best, but they'll also tell you a bunch of other options they reviewed and why they didn't choose something. You may actually choose a product that they didn't choose because maybe the reason they didn't choose it isn't relevant to you. So I think it's a nice place to look for products. But here you'll see they said the best beach umbrella is not actually an umbrella. So thinking about things like a canopy or an umbrella or other ways to make sure that you have shade if you're going to be outside. You always want to carry water with you. So best thing is going to be an insulated, reusable water bottle. You don't want to rely on having to buy water when you're outside if you can avoid it. Because again, if you're going somewhere, who knows where you're going to be able to buy it. Having water in a plastic bottle, we can spend a whole other day talking about plastics in the water supply and things like that. But especially you don't want plastic heating up and then drinking from that water bottle. So having an insulated reusable water bottle really is best. This is definitely a time to enjoy icy beverages and foods. And of course, you can be creative about that. In our house, we often will make popsicles over the summertime, and they're actually really easy to make with no added sugar, or you can buy them. There's many that are sold in the store. Something that you do want to avoid in drinks that you purchase is too much caffeine. So you don't want to down, 4 frappuccinos. Um, and you also want to avoid having too much alcohol. Both of those things are dehydrating and can really make you feel worse. So of course, okay to have these things now and then and sometimes, but you just don't want to drink them in large quantities, especially if it's at a time when you think you're going to be very hot. Definitely be looking for opportunities to cool off. So any cool water, like going in a pool or a lake, or if you're at the beach, even if you're someone who traditionally hasn't gone in the water, now it's something that's great to try. Or sprinklers on a lawn. You can look for places that are air conditioned. So if you're going to be out somewhere, like a boardwalk or something, you can kind of scout out when you arrive where the places are, where there's a cafe that you could duck into. And if it's someplace that you've driven, don't be afraid to plan to go into your car for a few minutes, every hour or so, just to make sure that you're not really getting overheated if you're really outside for a long time. Another thing to consider is using cooling gear. A lot of my patients will use different cooling items that they've found over the years. And I think different strategies work for different people in terms of what they like and what they're able to tolerate. So something that's super simple, it doesn't require any equipment, is just an ice pack or a wet washcloth or a towel that you could bring with you. And you can just put it on the back of your neck or on your wrists. That can be really helpful for cooling down quickly. Things like a handheld fan, some of them even have mist attached to them. Some people like that. And then, of course, there are products like cooling vests. And I would definitely urge you to check out the MSA website. They have a really nice section on cooling and all kinds of different products. And there's also a really wonderful program available for financial assistance with cooling products. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. So if you do find that you've gotten yourself into a situation where you've accidentally gotten really overheated, you want to immediately cool off. So the ways that we just discussed about cooling off, you want to look for those, right? So get something cold to drink, try and look for some place where there's air conditioning. You should expect that your usual MS symptoms may feel significantly worse. So you may find that, you're struggling with mobility, or your vision doesn't feel right, or you feel extremely fatigued or cognitively foggy. So those things are to be expected. And even though you feel bad, you want to definitely try not to panic and just kind of think about how you can solve this situation. You definitely need to ask for help if you need it. And you have to give yourself time to rest and recover because you really may not feel better immediately. Okay, so now we'll move on to our second step here, which is working towards a healthier lifestyle and some special summer considerations. So there are a number of different dietary patterns where we have some evidence at this point for help in symptom management in MS. And so I've listed some of the more common ones here. So Swank diet, Dr. Swank was an absolute pioneer, a man before his time in testing out a very low saturated fat diet. I'm sure people will be familiar with Dr. Walls and her protocol, which is a modified paleo diet. The McDougall diet, which has been tested by my colleagues at OHSU, Dr. Yadav, caloric restriction and intermittent fasting. Both of those patterns have been tested in small pilot studies. Ketogenic diet, my colleague Dr. Brenton has been looking at that. Our group has kind of focused our efforts on a Mediterranean or mind style diet. We're not going to kind of get into all of the details about the way these patterns are different from each other or the specific data for any of them right now. It's outside the scope of this particular talk, although this is my favorite topic, so I'm always happy to talk about these things with anyone offline. But the reason I have them all listed here is that we have evidence that all of these are helpful in terms of reducing fatigue in particular, but seem to have an impact on many MS symptoms when we compare them to kind of a traditional Western diet that relies highly on ultra-processed foods. So what I tell people is if one of these patterns really speaks to you, then that's wonderful. And that's great. You can do that. But if not, and you're just looking for some tips, then really what you're looking at is What are the recommendations that are unifying? So I'm extremely lucky to be part of a wonderful group of clinicians and researchers who are particularly interested in diet and other lifestyle factors, which is the Wellness Research Working Group for the National MS Society. And so those of us who've conducted studies in the different dietary patterns that I mentioned are part of this group. And we came up with a set of recommendations that we felt, okay, we don't have specific evidence to recommend a very specific diet, but there are certain things that we can all agree on that we think would be beneficial. And so these are those recommendations. So they are that you should prepare meals at home as much as possible. You want to try to incorporate colorful, fresh fruits and vegetables every day. Some people choose not to eat grains, and that's fine. But if you do choose to eat grains, you should try to choose whole grains over refined grains. And you should avoid and limit processed foods and added sugars as much as possible. So with that in mind, we'll talk about a couple of summary recommendations. So there's a list here of some different vegetables that are in season over the summer in most of the places where most of us live. I recognize we probably have people here from all over the country, but um, in the US, these are some common vegetables that we'll see over the summer. I'm sure some of you out there have a home garden. We don't have that here in New York City. It's not an option for me, but it's a wonderful thing to do if gardening is something you enjoy. And so the idea here, and our dietitian Jess always says this, eat a rainbow. Lots of really great stuff that's available over the summer in terms of vegetables. Same thing goes for seafood, a very healthy option, a nice way to get protein and healthy fats. So there's a list here of many of the fish that are in season over the summer, and you can look at, this is from Fresh Direct. I have a little picture here, but Fresh Direct is a grocery delivery service in New York City, and they have posted, and a lot of other grocery places will also post kind of what's in season, and that it really benefits you to shop seasonal for produce as well as for fish and other things that you buy, because you're likely to get stuff that is highest quality and also lowest prices. So great for your wallet also. Summer fruits, kind of same thing. So things to think about are summer stone fruits, which are really high in fiber. So really great, especially plums for constipation, for example. They have a high flavonoid content, so we think these are very healthy for you. Berries, high in antioxidants. Blueberries, strawberries, raspberries are all in season over the summer. Watermelon is a fruit that used to get, I think, a bad rap because it is high in sugar, but it does have a lot of fiber, and it does also have a lot of water. That's why it's called a watermelon. And so it is great for hydration, and it's a really wonderful thing. I have it here, freeze your favorite fruits for a cool treat. So that's one of the things we talked about for cooling down is, making popsicles with no sugar added. You can just use fruits, tons of recipes out there, but you can also eat frozen fruit right out of the bag. You can either buy fruit that is frozen fruit from the freezer aisle, super easy. You don't have to prep it at all. Or if you have fruit at home, you can just stick it in a bag in the freezer and then just take it to go when you're going out. So in terms of how to get started with dietary changes, I recommend starting by thinking about what your goals are. So you're not going to overhaul your entire diet in one day. So I think the things to think about are, well, what do I want to do in the short term? What are a couple of small changes that I could make now that are not going to be, painful for me to make and that I can actually do? And then in the long term, is there some place I'd like to be in terms of my diet over the long term? And then kind of think about what's the roadmap to get there. I think it's really important to include your household in your plans. If you live with other people in your house, um, things are really going to be easiest if you are preparing one set of meals for everyone. It's very hard to have, different, completely different diet than everyone else that you live with. And so I really encourage people to include the whole household and really make it so that it's one set of everything for everyone. There's really no reason why you can't come up with something that is healthy and good for everyone and that everyone can enjoy. There's so many choices and options out there. You want to aim to make And I feel like it is fair for me to say that because I have 4 children at home and everyone has to eat the same thing at dinner every night. There's no exceptions. So I think it's also really great to aim to make positive changes that are really going to become your lifestyle rather than looking for a specific diet. A diet is something you might do for like a few days or a few weeks or a few months and then kind of go back to the old habits later. The idea is really to make a change that is going to become your new way of eating. And so that it's going to be sustainable for you over time. Practice makes progress. It's not going to be perfect in a day. It's definitely good to ask for help. This is something you can definitely talk to your primary care doctor about. If it's available to you, I would highly encourage people to arrange a visit with a dietitian. You can ask at your MS center or your neurologist if they have a staff member who's able to do counseling about diet. At our center, we are extremely fortunate to have a wonderful dietitian that we work with, but not everyone's going to have that. However, there may be someone in the practice. It could be your neurologist, it could be a nurse, it could be, anyone who's part of the practice, even if they're not a dietitian, may have the experience to be able to do some counseling about diet. And then lastly, and this is a theme, you have to be kind to yourself. So it's not going to be perfect. It's definitely not going to be perfect in a day, but nothing in life is perfect. And it's perfectly okay to have things now and again that you might not see as healthy. That is perfectly all right. That's part of life. Okay, so a few tips that I think are particularly relevant to summertime. These are tips that are relevant all year round, of course, in terms of managing fatigue, but I think particularly in the summer where a lot of people have that kind of melty feeling about them, these tips are particularly helpful. So first of all, in terms of meal planning. So you want to do your meal prep at times when you have more energy. So if you notice that there's a certain time of day when you feel your best, that's a good time to spend a few minutes doing some meal prep. Or if there's a day of the week when you have a little more free time or a little more time to rest, that would be a good day to do a meal prep. A lot of people will do meal prep, in some part of the day on Sunday for the week. You definitely want to use your freezer. So if you're making something that freezes well, try doubling the recipe and then you have a meal for another day in the week. That's a great thing to do. I highly recommend using grocery delivery service. It's what our family does here in New York City, but at this point, most places have some sort of grocery delivery service available. It will really cut down on the time and energy that you spend in terms of preparing meals. Simple meals are really wonderful. I have sheet pan dinners. We had a sheet pan dinner in our house this evening that looked actually not too dissimilar from this New York Times recipe that I had here on the side. New York Times Cooking has an entire section on sheet pan dinners. The lovely thing about them is the entire dinner is literally on the sheet pan and it's really easy. So if you do actually just like this and then put a sweet potato in the oven, you have your whole dinner right there. And so it's easy on the cleanup, it's easy to prepare. You can use frozen vegetables to avoid having to chop things. We'll get to that in a minute, but that's a really easy way to do cooking. One pot recipes are similarly wonderful. And then things that are set it and forget it. These are a lot of suggestions from Jessica. Set it and forget it. So using the slow cooker, an air fryer, things where you can just put something in and then it's going to be done and you don't have to spend too much time and attention on it. Using ingredients that are pre-chopped or pre-measured. Some people are, concerned about, well, if maybe the pre-chopped things are not as high quality or this or that. I wouldn't worry so much about that. If the choice is either using pre-chopped or pre-measured ingredients or getting takeout, I would definitely go for the pre-chopped or pre-measured. Similarly, meal cuts or other shortcuts can be really helpful. And don't be afraid to ask family and friends to help. A lot of times I think, family and friends may offer to help and you may feel like you don't know what to ask them to do. This is something really tangible that if someone asks you, it sees that you're not feeling well and asks, can I help you with something? You could say, yeah, it would be wonderful if you have the bandwidth to, help me prep this. Or when you're making food for your family to make double of something and we'll eat it another night. Those are things that others can do and that will be happy to help you. And I think it's also great to keep in mind that a healthy diet pays itself back in terms of helping you manage your fatigue going forward. Okay, so getting into exercise. So I have here a reference, which is a really great paper published a few years ago by some of the biggest experts in the field in terms of exercise and MS. And what they recommended is 150 minutes of exercise or lifestyle physical activity per week, which is a lot, but it's definitely a goal to strive for. And what we tend to recommend is a combination of aerobic exercise, strength training, stretching, and balance training, which I'll go over in a minute. It's really important to note that this is possible at any ability level. This paper is all about how people who have any ability level can still exercise. A lot of my patients will have the impression that just because they're in a wheelchair, that means that they can't exercise. And that is absolutely not true. There's so much that you can still do, even if your mobility is impaired. And exercise has really great benefits in terms of mobility, fatigue, mood, other symptom management too in people who are living with MS. So I'll just kind of run through this briefly just to go over the different types of exercise that we recommend. So aerobic exercise, we recommend doing at least 2 to 3 times per week. And examples are things like walking, but at a good pace, or running if that's something you're able to do. Biking, you could consider doing a stationary bike. Swimming is great. We're going to talk about that more later. Benefits of aerobic exercise include improving cardiovascular fitness and improving your endurance. So a lot of people will say, okay, I can walk, X, Y, and Z far before I start to get tired. Well, if you improve your aerobic capacity, that part is also going to get easier. Strength training. So that can be done, traditionally in the gym with weights, but it really doesn't have to be. So you could get a set of resistance bands, or even with no equipment at all, using exercises that use your body weight. So things like doing squats or planks or doing some Pilates. Strength training, we recommend at least twice per week and is really important to build and maintain muscle mass, especially as we age, and also to help maintain bone mass. And these things are especially crucial for women. Stretching and range of motion exercises. So things like having your own stretching routine or doing some yoga or Tai Chi or Pilates. This is something I highly recommend for people who have muscle tightness and spasticity. A lot of my patients will be up at night with muscle tightness, and they find that they're sometimes even able to get away without taking a medication if they add in a really great stretching routine for before bed, especially. Balance and gait training. So there's a lot of different exercises that you can do to work on your balance and help reduce falls. So how have I started? So people will often say, what is the best exercise program for MS? The best exercise program is the one that you're actually going to do. So the first thing to do is to look for an activity that you will get some enjoyment from for at least some of your workouts. I'm not saying that every single workout you do is going to be a blast, but if you can find some way to incorporate something that you really do enjoy, that will be something that you look forward to. That's really great. So something like a yoga class or a dance class or a Pilates class, maybe playing a sport with your friends. You want to do something that you can make into a habit. Everything is a habit. You can make it, you can break it. So if you make a habit something that um, exercise into a habit, and it's something that you do, every single day, or you do it on certain days of the week at least, and that's something that you're more likely to be able to stick with. Same goes with including your family. I highly recommend including your family. So that can be something like playing a sport together, or everyone goes for a walk together after dinner, or whatever it is. I think if there's some way to include your family, going on a hike on the weekend, again, makes it more likely that you're actually going to do the exercise and can help make it more enjoyable too. This is definitely an area where you want to ask for help. Talk to your neurologist. You can consider working with a physical therapy if you and your doctor think that that's appropriate. For some people, they really don't need the expertise of a PT, but something like a personal trainer or even an online platform. For us in our wellness program, we partner with MS Workouts, which is a wonderful online platform for people who live with MS. I actually saw a patient today who's doing MS workouts and absolutely loves it. And the reason she loves it is because her mobility is really limited with her legs, but they offer all of their classes come in a either standing or seated format. And so she loves that she can do all of the yoga, and everything has a version that you can do sitting down. You definitely also want to ask if your MS center or your neurology practice has a staff member who's able to help. Again, that could be your neurologist who has expertise in exercise. It could be a PT that they work with. It could be a nurse. It could be anyone in the practice. So always good to ask. So some particular tips. Um, you want to choose a time of day that works best for you in terms of energy level. And so this is something that you might have to try out. So some people feel like they do their best in the morning when they just kind of get it started and get their exercise done for the day and they feel good for the rest of the day. Some people feel like exercise really exhausts them. And if they do that in the morning, then they have trouble functioning during their day in terms of work or taking care of their family or whatever else they need to do. And so they might prefer to do exercise a little bit later in the day. And some people feel like that actually helps them sleep. Some people feel like they're best if they do some exercise in the middle of the day. If you have a lunch break from work and you want to spend 20 minutes, doing some planks or something like that in your office, you could definitely do that. Or just go for a walk outside in the middle of the day. If it's not too hot, that can also work. Um, you definitely want to include a proper warm up and a cool down period that helps to prevent injuries and prevent muscle tightness. You really need to start slow and build up. So you can't expect if you're someone who hasn't been exercising that you're going to hit that 150-minute recommendation in the first week. It's just not a reasonable goal. That's something to kind of work up to over time. In the same vein, you want to make sure that you're giving your body enough time to rest and recover, especially between heavier workouts. I would definitely recommend considering having an active recovery day built in, every other day or once every few days. And so I would say for people, instead of having days where you don't do any activity, this active recovery day is a day where maybe you are not biking, but you're doing some light yoga or some stretching. And so you're still getting your minutes in, you're getting your movement in, your body's going to feel better if you do that on the lighter days. And then just as we said with diet, I said it was going to be a theme. You have to be kind to yourself. It's not going to be perfect all the time. There are going to be some days where you just feel like you just can't do it, and that is perfectly okay. We just do our best. So special considerations for summer. You want to make sure you're cool before you start. You do not want to start your workout already hot and overheated. Make sure that you're drinking plenty of water. And again, you want to make sure your hydration status is where it should be before you start exercising. So you don't want to, go into your workout feeling, maybe I'm kind of thirsty or I didn't drink that much water today, and then have to play catch up afterward. Of course, that's going to have to be balanced in terms of bladder issues and access to a restroom. Keep your water bottle with you. So definitely, if you're going to a gym or you're going and doing something outside, make sure you're carrying water or you have a way to get water. You need to optimize your environment. So the coolest times for outdoor activities are going to be, again, early morning and evening. Check the weather and plan accordingly. So if you have different workouts that you do, and some of them are outside and some are inside, you definitely want to make sure that you're checking the weather and not planning for an outdoor exercise in the middle of the day when it's going to be 100 degrees. And you should consider exercising indoors sometimes. I know some people really just love being outside, and that's great. You got to make it work for you. You need to be mindful of what you're trying to accomplish and really adjust things as appropriate. So something that's really great to consider, especially for summer, is water exercise. So in terms of swimming, it's never too late to learn. I, could swim to save my life when I was younger, but was never really a swimmer. And one of my daughters decided she's going to be my swimming coach and teach me how to properly swim. So it's never too late to learn. Water aerobics or other classes that take place in a local pool are a great way to also socialize. A resistance pool is something that some of my patients really like. You can get one of these small pools. Either you can get one for your home. I have a patient who has one in his home, but you can also access these. A lot of therapy places will have them. And I do really want to do a shout out here for MSA. They have a really wonderful entire section on aquatics. So I would recommend checking that out. Some additional strategies are having a cold or wet towel or ice pack, as we had talked about earlier, using a cooling vest, frequent breaks and rest periods. So I have a patient who really likes running outside, and that's really what she enjoys doing. And so she'll halfway through her run that her legs start to feel really tired and she just has to stop. So we said, instead of fighting it, just build that in and just know this is how far I can run and I'm going to have to stop here and take a break for a few minutes and then I'm going to start up again. And that's perfectly okay. It's wonderful that she's able to get outside and do that. And that's what we should focus on, not the fact that she needs a break in the middle. You want to build up your tolerance to exercise slowly, not something you're going to accomplish overnight. Okay, so now we'll spend our last few minutes talking about sleep. So in terms of optimizing sleep, we have a few recommendations. One is to maintain a consistent sleep schedule. You want to try to go to bed and wake up the same time every single day. And yes, that does include the weekends. We don't want you staying up late at night and waking up super late on the weekend. If you do feel like you need to sleep in a lot on the weekend, that's key. That's a key note for you that you're not getting enough sleep during the week. So that means we got to adjust the weekday routine. You want it for about 9 hours of sleep each night, noting that some people might need more. Evening routine that promotes sleepiness at bedtime and staying asleep is really, really helpful. So if I wasn't doing this webinar, you would see that the rest of my apartment right now is very dim. And so you want all artificial lighting, I say usually at least 2 hours before bedtime. And so that means either using dimmers if you have lights that are on dimmer switches, or switching over to lamps, or only having certain lights on. The last thing you want to do when you go into the bathroom to wash up before bed is flip on some, huge, makeup mirror light or something that's right in your face. And the reason for that is lighting is signaling your brain actually through wake up, it's daytime. And so that's the opposite of what you need to go to sleep. When you turn lighting down, you are signaling to your brain that it's time to produce melatonin, which is a hormone that we produce at nighttime to help us sleep. Your brain really needs that signaling to know that it's time to get sleepy. No flashing lights, TVs, other devices at least an hour before bedtime. Instead, I'd love for you to find an activity that's relaxing for you. So for some people, that may be talking with family and friends on the phone, listening to calming music, taking a bath, doing some gentle stretching, also a great way to work against that spasticity we were talking about, or meditation. These are all some things to try. Something to pay attention to that a lot of people often don't think about is you may need to adjust your eating and drinking habits. You do not want to eat a large meal late at night because then your body is going to be busy digesting when it's supposed to be resting. Avoiding alcohol. So a lot of people think that alcohol helps them fall asleep or might help them fall asleep faster. It might make you fall asleep faster, but it actually really interferes with sleep quality. And so you will, even if it's not a large amount of alcohol, you will actually wake up not feeling as good the next morning. It's also dehydrating. You also want to avoid caffeine after 2 p.m. for most people. Some people are okay with a little bit later, but what you may find if you have caffeine later in the day is it helps you through the afternoon, but then you either have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. So caffeine can actually stay in your system for a really long time. For some people, even after 12, it's interferes with nighttime sleep. So pay attention to how that affects you. You want to optimize your environment. The room should be cool, it should be dark, and it should be quiet. So in terms of the darkness, I mean, it should be really, really dark. So you want to, a lot of us have, little electronics and things like an air purifier or a humidifier or chargers or things that have little lights on them. I don't know why all these things have little lights on them, but it's really good to cover them up if you can. So either you can throw a towel over something that's got a light on it or unplug things that you don't actually need on during the night. There are little stickers that you can put that are specifically designed for that purpose. You can also try using an eye mask if it just doesn't seem dark enough in the room. And again, important. My husband always says your eyes are closed. I don't see why that's important. But actually, no, your brain is getting those signals even when your eyes are closed, that there are lights there. And that's something that can really disrupt your nighttime sleep. You can try using a white noise machine if you live in a place that is noisy or there are kind of random noises that wake you up. You do not want to lie in bed for a long time awake. So if you find yourself awake for more than about 20 minutes or so and unable to sleep, you want to get out of bed and try one of those relaxing activities we talked about just a moment ago, like meditation or doing something else that's calming to you. and get back into bed when you feel sleepy. And the reason for that is if you lie in bed awake and you can't fall asleep, you will start to associate that sleeplessness and anxiety with being in your bed. Your brain makes associations and then it keeps them. And so then you've kind of made that association that a bed is someplace that we lay awake and are anxious instead of the bed is the place where we go to sleep. And so you definitely want to make sure you're getting up and just coming back when you actually feel sleepy and ready to fall asleep. You do want to pay attention to things that wake you or keep you up at night and address those with your doctor. So these are a couple of tips that are kind of specific to people living with MS. So my patients tend to have issues with their bladder. I have several patients who we have taking bladder medicine just at night. They're okay with the fact that they need to use the restroom frequently during the day, but at night it's something that wakes them up repeatedly. And so I have some people who take bladder medicines just at night. And there are other techniques also in terms of limiting liquids right before bed and some other things you can do from a behavioral standpoint to work on the bladder as well. Spasticity, we've talked about a few times, definitely a stretching regimen before bed and perhaps medication. Same thing goes for pain and for restless legs. These are things to pay attention to if they're waking you up or keeping you up at night, and you should talk about them with your doctor. Mental health issues, also really important, huge topic. We're not going to discuss it today, mostly due to lack of time and other topics we wanted to go over, but hugely important when it comes to sleep to make sure that you're addressing things like depression and anxiety, which are common in people who live with MS. They can really interfere with sleep. If you take a nap during the day because you have a lot of fatigue, what you want to do is try to keep it as early in the day as possible so that it doesn't interfere with your nighttime sleep. And you want to keep it short. So a power nap, something that's about 20 minutes where you don't get into a really deep sleep, but where you feel refreshed. For many people, that's kind of a perfect amount of time where they feel like they can continue with their day, but it's not going to keep them up at night. So again, something to pay attention to, and not everyone's going to be the same in terms of this stuff. Similarly, if you are someone who takes a stimulant medication during the day and you're having trouble sleeping, that's something to think about as a potential contributing factor. So if you do take a stimulant, you want to take it as early in the day as possible. If you're someone who takes a second dose, you want to try to move the second dose a little earlier, and you may want to consider a dose adjustment. It may not be worth whatever benefit you're getting from it if it's keeping you up at night, interfering with your sleep, because you're never going to feel well and rested if you're not getting adequate nighttime sleep. So particularly in summertime, you may have more fatigue. And for some people, that is going to translate into need for sleep. You should also be aware of how changes in the clock and daylight affect your sleep. A lot of us have a tendency to kind of stay up later over the summertime. We're doing more things outside in the evening. If you go to sleep later and then, sun is rising earlier in the morning, you can really kind of put yourself in a place where you're getting a lot less sleep than you are in the other seasons, and that may be contributing to not feeling well during the day. So those are things to pay attention to. And again, you can use things like blackout fuel in the morning when the sun is up. Pay attention to your body. I can't emphasize that enough. Okay, so a few quick conclusions of what we went over this evening. While it does not cause permanent damage, heat can definitely worsen MS symptoms, particularly fatigue. Planning strategies to keep cool are really important. Lifestyle modifications can help managing MS, and tonight we talked about diet, exercise, and healthy sleep. And attention to special considerations for summer will make for a less uncomfortable and hopefully even enjoyable season. I will conclude by thanking all of the wonderful people that I work, particularly those who participate in our patient wellness program that helps us deliver all this information to our patients. And of course, all of my patients and our funders for helping us research on these really important topics. And I give you a little shot of my people at home who I will have to thank for actually staying quiet during this webinar. Thank you all so much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Katz, and we truly appreciate this informative presentation and all the practical tips and important information that you share with our MS community as they prepare for summer months. We do have a few minutes left and would like to address some of the questions from the audience. And our first question is there any clinical data regarding gluten-free food and multiple sclerosis? I know you
Oh,
mentioned a couple of diets and nutrition
yeah,
tips.
yeah, that's a great question. There are no clinical data. The little bit of data we have, I would say gluten is the thing that is probably the least well researched. One of the most common questions I get, but the least well researched. There's a little bit of preclinical data in some animal models, and then recently there's a very small pilot study. I wouldn't say it's clinical data. Their primary endpoint was looking at for they had some people that they did restricted for gluten, and then they did blood draws. And so the primary endpoint was looking to see if certain cell type changed to something that was kind of less inflammatory, and it didn't. Um, there were some other changes that they did see in terms of the immune profile, but I would say those data are very preliminary, and there have been no clinical trials that have looked at a gluten-free diet in people with MS. And so what I tend to tell my patients, since this is not information that we have or that we're likely to have in the near future, is that if gluten bothers you, then you shouldn't eat it. So if you're someone who feels foggy and unwell after you eat things that contain gluten, you should stay away from it. However, what I don't want you to do is go to the store and buy a whole bunch of gluten-free products. What I want you to do is just take that as something that you don't eat. You can still eat grains. There are many whole grains that don't contain gluten. And so I would kind of focus on those because they do have a high fiber content, which is beneficial for your gut microbiome and also for MS symptoms. And so I would kind of focus on those and just kind of eliminate something like bread, from things that you eat if you really don't want to eat gluten. Because a lot of those products, they all are considered ultra processed foods. They have a lot of additives and preservatives and things that will absolutely destroy your gut, all in the name of trying to avoid gluten. Now you've actually put something in your diet that's really definitely unhealthy for you. And so that's my recommendation. If you don't have a problem with gluten, you don't think it's something that bothers you, then I think it's perfectly fine. And then I just recommend whole grains.
Thank you so much. I think that's another topic that our audience are having so many questions. So definitely we
Yeah,
can plan for a second part and just focus on nutrition and diet.
yeah, sure.
Um, Thank you for that. And another question is, we talked so much about tips for the summer, and during the summer is usually people have vacations and family plans. And one of the questions is about family members and care partners. So how to have that conversation with them so that they understand that MS patients might have intolerance to heat and fatigue, and those are invisible symptoms, and sometimes it's hard
Yes,
to have that conversation. Any tips?
yes, yes. It is so important. I have one of my patients who her family really likes to go to Disney World. And she used to love going to Disney World, but now going to Disney World terrifies her because it's hot and you're outside all day and you have to walk really far. And right, it's a lot of things. And she doesn't want to disappoint her children and this and that, right? I think it is really important to be honest. And this applies not only to this specific situation, but to kind of all situations you find yourself in. I think it's really important to be honest with your partner and your family about your needs. And because those are invisible symptoms, I think it's important not to assume that people know or that they should know. Um, you have to tell them. You have to say, this does not feel good to me. This is going to make me feel really sick. Um, let's work together on coming up with a plan that's going to work well for everyone. Right. So nobody really likes to be out in the sweltering heat, right? Without breaks. So that no one's going to be against you on that. But it's important to be really open and honest with what you can tolerate. And if you're not feeling well, you absolutely have to speak up. So, and much like fatigue, which I've had a lot of conversations with family members, I always tell people if you're having trouble, communicating with your partner or someone else in your family about these issues, bring them with you to an appointment and let's discuss it together. I think that can be really helpful. We also, in our practice, are super fortunate to have two really wonderful social workers. And they're also always happy to help with those family discussions. But I think my number one tip, most important thing, is to be really open and honest about your needs and what you're feeling, and not to be worried about disappointing people or things like that, because no one in your family wants you to feel unwell.
That's great advice. Thank you so much. We're running out of time, and I want to honor and respect everyone's time. So I will email you the rest of the questions so
Okay.
that we can add that as a resource alongside with the recording. But thank you so much, Dr. Katz. You cover so many topics that are so important for our MS community. And I'm sure that we all learn so much and we can share all the learnings and insights with our family members. Thank you for your time, your insights, and expertise. And to our participants at home, thank you so much for joining us tonight and learning alongside Dr. Katz and our MSAA team. We hope you found tonight's webinar helpful and empowering as you look ahead a healthy summer. Stay well, stay cool. And one big takeaway that we got from Dr. Katz today is like be flexible, be kind to yourself, and just focus on your goals. So thank you so much for being here with us. This program was recorded and will be archived on our MSAA's website within the next couple of weeks. Please don't forget to fill the brief survey and give us feedback and let us know how the program went. And on behalf of MSAA, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening and enjoy your summer. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.